The sun was shining bright that Tuesday morning when Thomas Reed left his small apartment. At 38 years old, Thomas had the straight posture and alert eyes of someone who had spent years in military service. He had just moved to the neighborhood 3 months ago, hoping for some peace and quiet after his retirement from the army. "Morning, Mr. Reed," called Mrs. Chen from her flower shop across the street. Thomas smiled and waved back. He had quickly become popular with the local shop owners, always polite, always ready to help carry heavy deliveries or fix a broken shelf. Today was supposed to be like any other day. Thomas needed to pick up some groceries and a few household items. He had just cashed his monthly veterans benefit check yesterday and was looking forward to treating himself to a nice dinner later. The bell above the door jingled as Thomas walked into the quick-stop convenience store. The cool air inside was a welcome relief from the growing heat outside. He nodded at the teenage boy stocking shelves, then grabbed a small basket and began picking out what he needed: bread, milk, some coffee, and a magazine about fishing. He'd been thinking about taking up fishing as a hobby now that he had more free time. "That'll be $32.76, said the cashier, a thin man with glasses who Thomas hadn't seen before. "Must be new," Thomas thought as he reached for his wallet and pulled out one of the crisp $50 bills he'd gotten from the bank. The cashier took the bill and held it up to the light, squinting at it. Thomas didn't think much of it. Checking large bills was normal. But then the man pulled out a special pen and drew a line across the bill. Thomas watched as the mark turned dark. "Is there a problem?" Thomas asked, noticing the cashier's expression change. "This doesn't look right," the cashier said, his voice suddenly cold. "Where'd you get this?" "From my bank yesterday," Thomas replied calmly. "I can pay with my card instead if you prefer." The cashier ignored the offer. "Just wait here," he said, taking the bill and walking quickly toward the back room. Thomas stood at the counter, feeling uncomfortable as other customers glanced his way. He could hear hushed voices from the back room, then saw the cashier on her phone. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Thomas considered leaving, but he really needed these groceries, and besides, he had done nothing wrong. The store's front door opened, and Thomas turned to see 2 police officers walk in: Officer Reynolds, a tall white man with a crew cut, and Officer Diaz, a shorter officer with a stern expression. They didn't look at any other customers but walked straight toward Thomas. "Sir, we need to talk to you about the money you just tried to use," Officer Reynolds said loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. Thomas felt his heart rate quicken, but he kept his voice steady. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding. That money came directly from First National Bank yesterday." Officer Diaz moved to Thomas's left side. "Do you have any ID on you, sir?" His hand rested near his weapon. "Yes, in my wallet," Thomas said, slowly reaching toward his back pocket. "Keep your hands where we can see them." Officer Reynolds suddenly shouted, causing several customers to turn and stare. Thomas froze, 20 years of military training kicking in. He knew how quickly situations could escalate. "My ID is in my back pocket. I'm just going to slowly take out my wallet, okay?" The officers exchanged glances. Thomas could feel the eyes of everyone in the store on him. The groceries he had carefully selected sat forgotten on the counter, as what should have been an ordinary morning shopping trip was quickly turning into something very different. "I'm just going to get my ID very slowly," Thomas said again, his voice steady despite the tension building in his chest. He moved his hand carefully toward his back pocket. Officer Reynolds nodded, but Thomas could see both officers were on edge. The store had fallen completely silent. The teenage stockboy stood frozen in the snack aisle, a bag of chips clutched in his hand. At the register next to them, an elderly woman watched with wide eyes. Thomas pulled out his wallet and handed it to Officer Diaz, who flipped it open. "It says here you're Thomas Reed," Officer Diaz read from the license. "You live on Maple Street." "Yes, sir. I moved here 3 months ago after my retirement." "Retirement at 38? Officer Reynolds raised an eyebrow, his tone suspicious. "Military retirement. I served for 20 years. Army," Thomas explained. Officer Reynolds ignored this information. "Sir, the store employee claims you attempted to use counterfeit money. Do you have any other bills on you?" Thomas nodded. Yes, I have 3 more 50s that I got from First National Bank yesterday. I can show you the withdrawal receipt in my wallet. As Thomas reached toward the wallet still in Officer Diaz's hands, Officer Reynolds suddenly grabbed Thomas's arm. I said, keep your hands where we can see them, he barked, yanking Thomas's arm behind his back with unexpected force. Pain shot through Thomas's shoulder, the same one that had been injured during his final tour. Officer, I'm not resisting, Thomas said through gritted teeth. The receipt is in my wallet. It proves where I got the money. Stop moving, Officer Reynolds commanded, though Thomas had barely shifted his weight to maintain balance. I'm standing still, Thomas replied, trying to keep his voice calm even as Officer Reynolds twisted his arm higher. The elderly woman at the next register gasped. He's not doing anything wrong. Why are you treating him like that? Officer Diaz turned to her. Ma'am, please stay out of this. This is police business. Thomas felt cold metal against his wrists as handcuffs were snapped on, tight enough to bite into his skin. His heart pounded, but 20 years of military discipline kept him from reacting in a way that might make things worse. Thomas Reed, you're being detained on suspicion of attempting to pass counterfeit currency, Officer Reynolds announced loudly. Officers, please check the receipt in my wallet, Thomas tried once more. Or we can call the bank manager. Her name is Mrs. Patterson. She can confirm I withdrew $300 yesterday afternoon. Officer Diaz flipped through the wallet but ignored the small paper receipt tucked into one of the compartments. Instead, he removed Thomas's credit cards, placing them in an evidence bag along with the 3 remaining $50 bills. We'll sort this out at the station, Officer Diaz said flatly. As they led Thomas toward the door, he caught sight of his reflection in the store's security mirror. A tall black man in handcuffs being escorted by 2 officers. The image burned into his mind, so far from how he had seen himself just an hour earlier. A respected veteran, a good neighbor, a man who had served his country with honor. Outside, the morning sun felt hotter now. Curious onlookers had gathered, drawn by the sight of the police car. Thomas kept his head high as the officers guided him across the parking lot, though shame crept up his neck like a hot tide. Watch your head, Officer Reynolds said mechanically as he pushed Thomas into the back seat of the patrol car. As the door slammed shut, Thomas caught sight of Mrs. Chen across the street, watching with her hand over her mouth. The look on her face matched exactly how Thomas felt, complete disbelief that a simple trip to buy groceries had somehow turned into this. Inside the police car, Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Stay calm, he whispered to himself. This is a mistake, and mistakes can be fixed. He had survived 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. He would survive this too. But as the car pulled away from the curb, Thomas couldn't help wondering if the battle ahead might be the hardest one he'd ever fought. The holding cell at the police station was small and cold. Thomas sat on the metal bench, his back straight, just as he had been trained to do during his years in the military. The handcuffs had finally been removed, but the red marks on his wrists remained. He looked at the gray walls around him and took deep breaths, the same way he had taught himself to stay calm in much worse situations. 20 years ago, an 18-year-old Thomas had stood tall as he swore to defend his country. Now, that same country had him sitting in a cell over a $50 bill that was probably real. The irony wasn't lost on him. Reed, someone's here to process you, a desk officer called out, unlocking the cell door. Thomas followed the officer to a processing room where they took his fingerprints and photograph. The officer didn't make eye contact, just went through the motions mechanically. Can I make a phone call? Thomas asked. After processing, the officer replied. As Thomas waited, his mind drifted back to the dusty roads of Afghanistan, where he had earned his first leadership role. He remembered Captain Williams telling him, Reed, you have a cool head under pressure. That's rare. That cool head had saved lives during his first tour when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device. Thomas had pulled 2 injured soldiers from a burning vehicle while under enemy fire. By his second tour, Thomas had been promoted to staff sergeant. During his 3rd tour in Afghanistan, he led a unit of 12 men. One night, 4 of his soldiers got trapped behind enemy lines during a patrol gone wrong. Despite orders to wait for backup, Thomas had assembled a small rescue team. "I will never leave my men behind," he had told his commanding officer before heading out into the darkness. That night had changed everything. Thomas and his team navigated through enemy territory for 7 hours, finally locating their trapped comrades in an abandoned building surrounded by hostile forces. The rescue mission succeeded, but not without cost. As they made their escape, an explosion caught Thomas in the right shoulder and leg. The pain had been excruciating, but he had continued leading his team to safety, refusing medical attention until all his men were secure. For that mission, Thomas received the Silver Star for gallantry in action. The Purple Heart came later as he recovered in a military hospital, enduring 3 surgeries to repair his shoulder. The medal ceremony had been held in his hospital room, with General Parker personally pinning the medals to his hospital gown. "Your country owes you a debt it can never repay," the general had said. After recovery and one more tour in Iraq, Thomas retired from active duty with numerous commendations and a permanent slight limp that acted up in cold weather. Civilian life had been an adjustment. Thomas found purpose in working with other veterans, helping them navigate life after service. 3 days each week, he volunteered at the Veterans Center downtown, assisting former soldiers with paperwork for benefits, finding housing, or just offering an understanding ear. The other 2 days, he led a support group for veterans dealing with PTSD and readjustment issues. "Your military experience makes you trustworthy," his supervisor at the center often said. "These guys open up to you because they know you've been where they are." The sound of the processing room door opening snapped Thomas back to the present. A different officer entered with a clipboard. "Says here you tried to pass counterfeit money," the officer said, reading from the form. "The money isn't counterfeit," Thomas replied calmly. "I got it from First National Bank yesterday. There's a receipt in my wallet if anyone would bother to check." The officer just shrugged. "Not my department. We'll hold you until the detective can interview you about where you got the fake bills." Thomas shook his head slightly. After everything he'd been through, the bullets, the explosions, the months of rehabilitation, he never expected to be treated like a criminal in the country he had risked his life to protect. But as he was led back to the holding cell, Thomas reminded himself of something he always told the veterans in his support group. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but right here at home. 3 hours had passed since Thomas arrived at the police station. The cell was quiet except for the occasional sound of officers walking by. Thomas had requested water twice, receiving it only once. His shoulder ached from where Officer Reynolds had twisted his arm, but he sat patiently, knowing that getting angry would only make things worse. Finally, the door opened. A plainclothes detective with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his shirt entered. "I'm Detective Rivera," he said, unlocking the cell. "Come with me." Thomas followed the detective to a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. The walls were bare except for a bulletin board with faded notices about police procedures. So, Detective Rivera began, placing a clear evidence bag on the table. Inside was the $50 bill Thomas had tried to use at the store. "Tell me where you got this." "Like I told the officers, I got it from First National Bank yesterday afternoon," Thomas replied. "I cashed my veterans benefit check. The teller gave me 6 $50 bills. I have a receipt in my wallet." Detective Rivera raised an eyebrow. "Your wallet's in evidence. I'll have someone check." He made a note but didn't seem in any hurry. "Detective, I served this country for 20 years. I would never try to pass fake money." Detective Rivera studied Thomas for a moment. "We'll see. Our lab is testing the bill now." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. A young officer entered and handed Detective Rivera a piece of paper. The detective read it, his expression changing slightly. "Well," he said slowly, "according to our lab, the bill is real." Thomas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "I told you." "The store's counterfeit pen must have malfunctioned," Detective Rivera admitted. "But we still need to verify your story about the bank." "Please do," Thomas said. "Call them. Ask for Mrs. Patterson, the manager." Detective Rivera left the room. Through the small window in the door, Thomas could see him talking to other officers, one of whom was gesturing emphatically. Something was happening. 20 minutes later, Detective Rivera returned with another man, older, with gray hair and a police captain's uniform. "Mr. Reed, I'm Captain Lawson, the older man said, extending his hand. I understand there's been a misunderstanding. Thomas shook the offered hand but said nothing. We contacted First National Bank, Captain Lawson continued. They confirmed you withdrew $300 yesterday, all in $50 bills. And we found the receipt in your wallet, just as you said. Thomas nodded. So I'm free to go. Yes, but first, Captain Lawson paused, looking at some papers in his hand. During processing, your name flagged in our system. Not for any criminal record, you don't have one, but because of your military service. Silver Star recipient, Purple Heart, 4 tours of duty. He looked up at Thomas with new eyes. Why didn't you mention any of this? Would it have made a difference? Thomas asked quietly. The captain had the decency to look uncomfortable. We have procedures we need to follow when currency is suspected of being counterfeit. Do those procedures include twisting someone's arm when they're not resisting, or ignoring their explanation and evidence? Thomas kept his voice level, but the words carried weight. Before Captain Lawson could respond, another officer appeared at the door with Thomas's belongings in a plastic bin, his wallet, keys, phone, and the 3 remaining $50 bills. Your things, sir, the officer said respectfully, setting the bin on the table. The department apologizes for the inconvenience, Captain Lawson said stiffly. You're free to go. Thomas gathered his belongings, noticing how the atmosphere in the room had changed. The word had spread about who he was. Officers in the hallway stepped aside as he passed, some nodding with newfound respect, others avoiding eye contact altogether. At the front desk, Thomas signed the release forms. 6 hours had passed since his arrest. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Thomas stood on the steps of the police station, breathing in the fresh air of freedom, but the bitter taste of injustice remained. Mr. Reed, a voice called. Thomas turned to see Detective Rivera hurrying toward him. Your groceries from the store. He handed Thomas a plastic bag. And I served too. Marines, 2 tours in Iraq. I'm sorry about today. Thomas accepted the bag and the apology with a nod. He understood what it cost the detective to say those words. But as he began the long walk home in the fading light, Thomas knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. News travels fast in small communities. By the next morning, everyone in town seemed to know about what had happened to Thomas Reed. As he stepped onto his front porch to get the newspaper, his neighbor across the street, Mr. Lopez, waved and walked over. Thomas, I heard what happened yesterday. That's not right, man. Not right at all, Mr. Lopez said, shaking his head. My brother-in-law is a lawyer. He said you could have a case. Thomas thanked him but said he needed time to think. Inside, his phone had been ringing nonstop since dawn. Friends from the Veterans Center, neighbors, even the local pastor had called to offer support. Thomas let most calls go to voicemail. He needed to process everything on his own terms. Around noon, there was a knock at his door. Thomas opened it to find Mrs. Chen from the flower shop, holding a small potted plant. Peace lily, she said, handing it to him. For peace of mind. My husband and I saw what happened. Not fair, how they treated you. Thomas accepted the plant with a genuine smile. Thank you. That afternoon, Thomas finally decided to return a call from his friend David, who ran the Veterans Center. The local paper wants to talk to you, David told him. And Channel 8 News called our office asking for a statement. This is getting attention, Thomas. I didn't ask for attention, Thomas said quietly. No, but maybe this happened for a reason, David replied. How many others has this happened to who didn't have your record? Who didn't have people willing to speak up for them? Thomas thought about that for a long time after hanging up. That evening, he sat on his porch watching the sunset, still undecided about what to do next. A police car slowed as it passed his house. Thomas tensed, but the car continued down the street. 3 days after the incident, Thomas's story appeared on the front page of the local newspaper, Decorated War Hero Wrongfully Arrested Over Genuine Currency. The article included his military photo in full uniform with his medals. By that afternoon, the story had been picked up by several national news websites. Thomas's phone rang again. This time it was a producer from a national morning show wanting him to appear live via video call the next day. Thomas politely declined. He wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity victim. He wanted accountability, not fame. Later that week, Thomas met with Lisa Wong, an attorney recommended by several veteran friends. Her office was small but organized, with framed diplomas and family photos on the walls. The store's security footage has been obtained, Lisa told him, opening her laptop. Would you like to see it? Thomas nodded. The video showed exactly what had happened: his calm demeanor throughout the encounter, his slow movements, the officer's aggressive response despite no resistance on his part. What about the officer's body cameras? Thomas asked. Lisa's expression darkened. That's where things get interesting. They claim there were technical issues with the footage, convenient gaps during your arrest. What are my options? Thomas asked. We file a formal complaint against the department alleging racial profiling, excessive force, and violation of civil rights, Lisa explained. Your military background makes you a very sympathetic complainant, and these missing bodycam recordings won't look good for them. That evening, Thomas received an unexpected visitor. Captain Lawson from the police department stood on his porch, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes. Mr. Reed, I came personally to extend the department's official apology, he said stiffly. We're conducting an internal review of the incident. And the officers involved? Thomas asked. Administrative duty pending the investigation, Captain Lawson replied. We're also implementing additional training for all officers on counterfeit detection procedures and proper detention protocols. After the captain left, Thomas sat alone in his living room, looking at a framed photo of his old unit in Afghanistan. They had faced danger together, trusted each other with their lives. That bond had been built on respect and integrity, values Thomas had always believed in. Now he faced a different kind of battle, one that would test those values in new ways. His phone buzzed with a text message from David. Veterans group meeting tomorrow. Everyone wants to support whatever you decide to do. Thomas looked at Mrs. Chen's peace lily sitting on his coffee table. Sometimes peace came through action, not silence. He had spent 20 years fighting for his country abroad. Perhaps now it was time to fight for what was right at home. The community center was packed with people. Thomas stood at the front of the room, surprised by the turnout. Veterans in their service caps sat beside local business owners, church members, and families from all over town. Mrs. Chen had closed her flower shop early to attend. Mr. Lopes brought his entire family. Even some police officers Thomas didn't recognize stood quietly at the back. Thomas cleared his throat and began to speak. I didn't ask to be here today, he started, his deep voice carrying across the silent room. 2 weeks ago, I was just a guy buying groceries. Now I'm standing here because what happened to me wasn't right, and it wouldn't be right if it happened to anyone else. He spoke without notes, telling his story simply and honestly. No drama, no exaggeration. Just the truth of what it felt like to be handcuffed in public, to have his word doubted, to be treated like a criminal despite a lifetime of service. This isn't about me getting money, Thomas explained. It's about making sure our police department serves everyone equally. It's about proper training and accountability. It's about making our community better. When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. An older veteran with a Vietnam service cap approached Thomas afterward, tears in his eyes. I'd fought for this country too, the man said. And what happened to you dishonors all of our service. That night, local TV news featured clips from Thomas's speech. The next morning, his phone rang with a call from the mayor's office requesting a meeting. 3 days later, Thomas sat across from Mayor Thompson and Police Chief Richardson in the mayor's wood-paneled office. Lisa Wong, his attorney, sat beside him with a notepad ready. Mr. Reed, the mayor began, first, let me personally apologize for what happened to you. It's not reflective of how we want our city to operate. Chief Richardson nodded. After reviewing the evidence, we've determined that proper procedures weren't followed during your detention. The officers involved will face disciplinary action. What kind of action? Lisa asked, pen poised. 2 weeks suspension without pay, mandatory retraining, and 6 months probation, the chief replied. Thomas leaned forward. That's a start, but this isn't just about those 2 officers. It's about the system that trained them, the procedures they followed or didn't follow. What exactly are you asking for? Mayor Thompson asked cautiously. Thomas pulled out a folder and passed copies of a document across the desk. These are recommendations developed with input from veteran groups, civil rights organizations, and law enforcement experts. We're asking for department-wide training on implicit bias, new protocols for verifying suspected counterfeit currency before making arrests, and community oversight for complaints about officer conduct. The mayor and police chief exchanged glances. This would be expensive to implement, the mayor said, flipping through the pages. Not as expensive as lawsuits, Lissa pointed out, and not as costly as losing community trust. Outside the mayor's office after the meeting, Thomas felt drained but determined. The media had gathered, waiting for a statement. Thomas had never enjoyed public speaking during his military career, but now he found himself stepping up to the microphones. Today we had a productive meeting with city leadership, he began. I believe they understand that what happened to me points to deeper issues that need addressing. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in progress. A reporter called out, "Would you say this was a case of racial profiling?" Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. I can't know what was in those officers' minds. But I do know this, a person's appearance shouldn't determine how they're treated by those sworn to protect and serve. My military uniform once marked me as someone who served this country. But without that uniform, I was judged differently. That needs to change. The story continued to gain national attention. Letters of support arrived daily at Thomas's home. A crowdfunding campaign to cover his legal expenses exceeded its goal within hours. Fellow veterans organized a rally in front of City Hall. Civil rights leaders reached out to offer assistance. Through it all, Thomas maintained his dignity and focus. When a major news network invited him to appear on their evening program, he accepted on one condition, that a representative from the police department appear alongside him. This isn't about sides, he told the producer. It's about finding solutions together. The night before the broadcast, Thomas sat on his porch with David from the Veterans Center, both men nursing cups of coffee as the stars appeared overhead. You know, David said, when you first came to volunteer with us, you told me you weren't sure what your purpose was after leaving the service. I think you might have found it. Thomas looked out at the peaceful street. I never wanted to be the face of anything. I just wanted to live my life. Sometimes life has other plans, David replied. Sometimes the battle finds you when you least expect it. Thomas nodded slowly. The fight ahead would be long and difficult, but he had never been one to walk away from a necessary battle. 3 years passed since that day at the convenience store. On a bright spring morning, Thomas stood at the back of the police academy auditorium, watching the graduation ceremony for new officers. His slight limp was barely noticeable as he made his way to the stage when his name was called. Police Chief Richardson, who had once sat across from Thomas in tense meetings, now greeted him with a genuine handshake and stepped aside, giving Thomas the podium. Good morning, Thomas began, looking out at the young faces in uniform. 3 years ago, I was handcuffed and put in the back of a police car over a real $50 bill. Today, I'm here to talk to you about your important role in our community. The room was completely silent as Thomas spoke about his experience, the changes that had come afterward, and the lessons learned on all sides. The badge you received today carries power, he told them. But with that power comes responsibility. How you use it will shape not just individual lives, but entire communities. When Thomas finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. Afterward, new officers lined up to shake his hand, some asking questions, others simply thanking him for his insights. One young officer with fresh-faced enthusiasm told Thomas, "Your story was the reason I decided to join the force. I wanted to be part of the change." The changes hadn't come easily. In the months following Thomas's complaint, there had been resistance from some officers who felt unfairly judged. Community meetings sometimes grew heated. Progress moved slowly through bureaucratic channels. But real changes did come. The department implemented new training programs on implicit bias. They established clear protocols for handling suspected counterfeit currency, requiring verification before making arrests. A civilian review board was created to examine complaints about officer conduct, with Thomas serving as one of its first members. The 2 officers involved in Thomas's arrest had initially been defensive. Officer Reynolds eventually left the force, but Officer Diaz chose a different path. After his suspension, he approached Thomas at a community event. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Officer Diaz had admitted. "I didn't see what I was doing that day. I just followed the same old procedures without questioning them." That conversation led to more, and eventually to an unexpected partnership. Using their combined experiences, Thomas and Officer Diaz now co-led workshops for police departments across the state on community relations and procedural justice. Thomas's work extended beyond police reform. With help from fellow veterans and community supporters, he established the Bridge Foundation, an organization dedicated to addressing both veterans' issues and racial justice. The foundation provided legal assistance to those wrongfully detained, supported veterans transitioning to civilian life, and built partnerships between community groups and law enforcement. After the graduation ceremony, Thomas walked through the town center. Things looked different now. Mrs. Chen's flower shop had expanded. The convenience store where he'd been arrested had new ownership and a sign in the window that read, "All are welcome here." The First National Bank, where his money had come from, now sponsored financial literacy programs for the community. As Thomas passed the local diner, familiar faces waved to him through the window. He had become something of a local celebrity, though he never sought that status. What mattered more were the changed policies, the new relationships, and the ongoing conversations in the community. That evening, Thomas visited the Veterans Center where he still volunteered weekly. David greeted him with a cup of coffee. "I saw you on the news again," David said. "Very impressive speech at the academy." Thomas smiled. "Just sharing what I've learned." "And what have you learned?" asked a young veteran who had recently joined their support group. Thomas thought for a moment. "I learned that sometimes what looks like the worst day of your life can become the beginning of something important. I learned that change is possible, but it takes time and persistence. And I learned that most people, when given the chance, want to do better." Later that night, as Thomas walked home under the stars, he passed a patrol car parked at the corner. The officer inside rolled down his window and gave a respectful nod. Thomas nodded back. The town wasn't perfect. The country wasn't perfect. There was still work to be done, battles to be fought, minds to be changed. But progress was happening, step by step, day by day. Thomas thought about the Silver Star and Purple Heart stored in a box in his closet. Those medals recognized his bravery on foreign soil, fighting for American ideals. But the work he was doing now, building bridges, creating understanding, bringing people together, this was also service to his country. Different battlefield, same values, courage, integrity, and the belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. As Thomas reached his front porch, the peace lily from Mrs. Chen, now much larger and healthier, still sat in his window. It had survived and thrived, just like the community around it, just like hope.